Hello, everyone. You just saw a very active scene on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. And I hope that you enjoyed the interview with Mr. Roger Kubarych, the Senior Vice President and the Chief Economist of the New York Stock Exchange last week. And today we will see the continuation of the interview with him. As you will realize, Mr. Kubarych has a very strong opinion about many things, such as about the Japanese market and then also about the strength of the U.S. economy. After the interview with him, we'll have a brief discussion about the content with Virginia LoCastro. How do you do?
Nice to see you again.
So I hope that you will enjoy the interview.
You think as time goes on, this will change because of economic reasons or political reasons, or some combination?
Mostly because of economic reasons.
Economic reasons.
Over time, the Japanese consumer will want to get the best products at the lowest possible
price.
Cost. And it's one thing to want to buy Japanese products because you have a deep belief that they have higher quality. That's true. In many cases they do. But you don't pay an unlimited amount of money for higher quality.
Right.
And in fact, in many product lines, foreign products are every bit as good as Japanese products. And as the Japanese consumer plays a more forceful role in deciding what gets produced and what gets imported, I think you'll see a lot of these barriers come down.
So if people see products that are cheaper, you know, coming from other places, they'll simply begin to buy those. For instance, melons or something, if they...
Well, agricultural products, it's very easy to see
right.
that the argument for imports, there's just no logical reason other than protecting the domestic industry why you wouldn't want to be able to buy the cheapest melon. I mean, there might be some fancy brand of melon that is particularly oriented to the domestic market, but then there are foreign producers of melon who will grow those varieties of Japanese melon if they could sell them in Japan. I'm sure there are all kinds of nifty Japanese-style melons that would be produced in California at 1/10 of the cost that they're produced in Japan.
If they could be sold
if you knew that you could sell those melons in Japan, you would produce them in California to the specifications, to the tastes of Japanese consumers. It wouldn't be technologically difficult. All you would need to do is plant the seeds.
A couple of years ago, the Japanese Stock Exchange started to admit people from other countries, but before that they were very, restrictive. We've been having people from other countries for a number of years allowed to enter the New York Stock Exchange to buy a place. Is that right?
There have been non-American members of the New York Stock Exchange for some time, but not forever. It's only a development in the last couple of decades. So Japan was a little bit behind in this liberalization and internationalization, but not totally behind.
And you think it makes much of a difference now that other countries can, people from other countries can have seats on the Tokyo Exchange?
It has great relevance to those financial institutions, those securities firms, American, German, British, who are eagerly seeking to build their Japanese business. It has both economic importance and symbolic importance. So it is a very major positive step forward for the Tokyo Stock Exchange to make the decision to admit more foreign members.
Will that in any way adversely affect, say, the New York Stock Exchange? You know, now that the Tokyo Exchange has members from more countries, how will that affect New York?
Well,
New York has been the center, some people have said, the financial center. Will it continue to be with larger and larger exchanges and other centers?
Well, clearly the New York Stock Exchange benefits from free and open capital markets. And with the penetration of firms in each other's markets, we see more and more activity, more and more talent coming into the market, more and more capital raising capacity, more and more trading acumen and trading scope. So therefore, there's a kind of a positive feedback that comes out of each of our countries opening ourselves up to the competitors from abroad. We all become stronger, and in the end, the general public benefits.
So I hear you saying in a lot of the comments that you make that the less intervention by any kind of outside forces, whether it's political or whatever, is ultimately better for everybody.
That's
that
right.
People doing things together seem to be able to decide on the basis of a lot of criteria, you know, price, quality, availability.
I think that's a general principle true, that every once in a while you have legitimate cases for slowing the process of change down where the pain is just too unbearable. But by and large, we all benefit from being able to have access to the best possible scope of choice, variety of products, and at the lowest possible prices. Then our standards of living will be much higher.
So in the last, say, 10, 15 years, there's a number of American industries have kind of deteriorated. You know, many people have been out of work. The government has sometimes tried to intervene, and perhaps in some cases letting market forces decide, from your point of view, might have been better for everybody.
Well, I don't agree with your premise.
No.
What happened was that market forces did decide. Market forces created
The
super strong dollar, which cost American industry a tremendous amount of competitiveness. Now, those market forces that created the super strong dollar were not rigged by government. So they were a reaction to the whole scope of broad economic policies, not in response to any specific measures in the area of trade or in the area of investment controls. And I think it would be a mistake to think that American industry deteriorated because of some special weaknesses of character, of management, talent, or whatnot. The American industries lost competitive position because the dollar got too strong. And the dollar got too strong because overall economic policies having to do with broad trends in savings and investment within the United States and within some of the other industrial countries got out of whack. They weren't well harmonized.
Right.
In fact, they were badly harmonized. And so American industry was a casualty. But I think that the notion that U.S. industry is intrinsically weak and deteriorating is just not backed up by the facts. In the last 18 months, there's been a tremendous increase in competitiveness of U.S. industries. Our export growth has picked up substantially. Profitability in manufacturing has increased. Productivity in manufacturing has increased. All of the right things are happening. That doesn't mean other countries have deteriorated. What it means is that economic incentives have changed. And now, because of the strong yen and the weak dollar, you have a very different set of economic incentives about what to produce and where to produce it than you had just a few years ago.
So the idea that American industries deteriorated over a particular time because of, say, poor management, poor quality of goods, or union, say, conflicts with management is partly untrue then.
It's more than partly untrue. It's very largely untrue.
So the monetary factor was much more critical. I mean, the value of the dollar had a much bigger impact than any internal variables.
Well, there are two things that really mattered. One was, as we've mentioned, the very unhappy period where the dollar got too high, not only against the yen, but against all sorts of currencies. In addition, the nature of demand expansion in the United States after 1980, with such a big increase in defense spending and such a huge increase in consumer spending as a result not only of tax cuts, but also of much greater ability to borrow. We had a freeing up the domestic financial system that allowed consumers to borrow a lot. Those two forces led to a pattern of consumption and production, which also was led to a lot of purchases of goods. And at the margin, those goods came from abroad. So there was not only the exchange rate, but also a shift in the composition of demand within the United States. both of those factors had a big negative effect on big chunks of U.S. industry.
And we're talking about industry, you know, production. What about the service industries? How did they work out in this period?
Well, during this period, the service industries expanded, but there was actually a bigger demand for goods than there was for services.
Mm-hmm.
So what we had to do was import more.
So that's
and
what
we
imported more.
needed was more balanced growth between goods-producing industries and service-producing industries.
It's closer to equilibrium now?
It's a better balance now. I don't think any of us know for certain what would count as equilibrium.
Right.
But it's certainly better, in a better balance now than it was, say, 3 or 5 years ago.
And in Japan, do you see the trend? You know, will there be more service growth? I mean, growth in the service industries more now?
I think it's
As people
inevitable.
have more money to spend on
Absolutely.
going on trips and things like that.
Well, that's
Yeah.
only one type
Yeah.
of service. The trouble with the word services is that
Yeah, what
there's
does it
a
include?
huge, wide variety of services lumped together that bear very little resemblance to each other. Actually, the housing industry is part of the services industry, and it provides housing services. And we know that Japan is committed to increase the quality of its housing, which is really scandalous given how well off the people are, how productive they are, how badly the housing is. By any international standard, you just can't even imagine the outrage there would be in this country if people of the same salaries had no choice but to live in the kinds of houses that many Japanese workers have no choice but to live in. And this is something that is really a direct result of agricultural policies and zoning policies and tax policies of government, which has essentially compressed the amount of land available
right.
for housing development. And it's also a problem of Japanese business, locating too many of its activities in the 2 or 3 large urban centers and not spreading that out around the country, as U.S. Businesses do in this country.
Thank you.
Well, that guy Kubarych certainly seems like a very well-informed economist, I would say.
Yes, I think so. Yes, he definitely. Well, he should know with his position. Yes, yes.
Somewhat a little bit overconfident, you would say?
Perhaps a bit, because at one point, John Fanso says something, and he comes in and directly says, "I'm sorry, but I don't agree with your premise," which is a little bit perhaps maybe top down. He's playing the knower, and he's assuming that John doesn't know that much.
Well, at the outset, they are talking about barriers in the Japanese market. And Mr. Kubarych says that as the Japanese consumers find out that the good products are available at lower prices through import and so forth, those barriers would come down. And they also talk about some examples such as agricultural products.
Right. Yes. Yes. And I'm not sure that will actually happen. I know that melons here, one of the jokes in the United States is that melons here cost $50, and in many cases that's true, those big, beautiful, green-looking ones. Whereas the same type of melon in the States will only be $2 to $3, maybe maximum $5. When I was a kid, one of the jokes was my father would often disappear on Sunday afternoons and go find places where he could find beautiful melons because that's something he particularly likes. And I've never told him how much melons cost here, so I don't know what his reaction would be. But most people see it as an example.
Well, that's a rather unfortunate example, I guess.
Right, right.
Very conspicuous and exaggerated, although it has been true to some extent.
Yeah.
And looks like Kubarych believes that Japanese consumers will probably play a more forceful role and want to buy best products at the lowest cost.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's true. I don't see any indications here myself. Most of my Japanese friends tend to prefer even to go off to places like Hong Kong or Singapore or some places in the States to do their shopping.
Oh, that's interesting.
I don't know.
You also mentioned that Mr. Kubarych made a rather strong statement of disagreement.
Yes.
Do you think that was a bit rude way to express disagreement?
Well, perhaps not rude, but a little bit too direct. However, he was asked to give in a sense, to convey his point of view and to give information, and that's what he was trying to do. And I think he was trying to, at least from his point of view, correct what he probably considers a misnomer or stereotype that the average American has.
He said, well, I don't agree with your premises. What would be the more courteous way of expressing disagreement?
Well, he might have prefaced it by saying, yes, that's true, that's what a lot of people think. However, there's another point of view.
I see.
He could have said that.
Toward the end also he talked about Japanese housing, and he said that Japanese housing situation is scandalous. Don't you think that is a little bit too strong?
Oh, well, I would agree, yes, yes. I don't find the housing in Tokyo more scandalous than a lot of the things I saw in New York. And one good point, I think, is that anywhere you live in Tokyo, it's safe. You cannot say that about most American cities.
So it's sort of a cultural bias.
I think so.
It's Japanese housing may be scandalous from the American standard, but not quite so by the Japanese standard.
No, by no means. Or even by, say, in some European countries, by European standards either.
So we just saw rather distinctive views by Mr. Kubarych. And next we will have another interview with Mr. John Alpert, who is the independent television producer. I'm pretty sure that you'll have entirely different kind of person.
John, you're one of the very few American journalists who have done stories for both Japanese television and American television. In your opinion, what do you think is the attitude among Americans these days about the relationship between Japan and America?
Well, I think it's changed, and I think people in the United States only recently have begun to lose the stereotype that they were taught during World War II, that every Japanese was basically a soldier obeying the emperor's word, buck-teeth cartoons, the big eyeglasses, and almost a little bit stupid. And the strength of Japan's economy and the way in which they're starting to dominate a lot of industries in the United States has changed the attitude of Americans towards Japanese.
What is the stereotype today, then, of the Japanese person that Americans would hold?
I think that the stereotype now is the Japanese businessman. A fellow in a dark suit who will work 40 hours a day, 50 hours a day, eat, sleep, drink his business, ready to sacrifice everything for the cause of his company, and somebody who is probably selling a product that's better than the products that we're making in the States. That's what many Americans believe.
Well, what do you think can be done to maybe improve the relations between Japan and America? Do you have any advice you could give to the Japanese politicians or the economists or even to the Japanese public?
Well, I think people in the States probably would like to know a little bit more about what the daily life in Japan is like for their peers. I think farmers would like to know what a Japanese farmer does. We really don't know much about those type of things, and we really are only familiar with the businessmen right now.
Okay, if you could do a big story about Japan, what would that story be?
Oh, it's hard to say. I think many reporters continue to be fascinated by the Japanese work ethic. And here in the United States, we realize that there are problems motivating people, getting them to produce, getting them to work hard. And everybody's amazed at the way the Japanese workers push themselves harder and harder. It's a topic that seems to be fascinating, but at the same time elusive. So I'd be interested in exploring that. but I'd also be interested in knowing more about people's daily lives, and I'd be interested in doing a story about typical homes, that type of thing.
So do you think the American public would be much more interested in learning about the daily lives of Japanese people?
I think they're curious, and I don't think they know that much. You know, here in the United States, we tend to fix on a stereotype, one or two segments of people's behavior and culture, and then after that we don't really do much. You know.
Well, recently in the United States, Mr. Gorbachev and Mr. Reagan have become super media personalities. Mr. Nakasone was one to a certain extent while he was prime minister. How about the current, we have a new prime minister now in Japan. Do you think his PR campaign has to start moving up in the United States?
I would say that virtually no one in the United States knows who the new prime minister of Japan is. And if you were to go out in the street now with this camera and you were to stop 10 people on the street, 9 out of the 10 people would not be able to tell you his name. Nobody knows who he is. Nobody knows anything about the man. In the end, because Mr. Nakasone had been around so long, we knew a little bit about him. But it was very superficial. We knew what he looked like. We knew how he combed his hair. But we didn't really know that much about the man and what he stood for. And Americans are like that. I don't know whether they care. They should. But right now, nobody knows who the new prime minister is. I could ask Troy. This is to the cameraman. Do you know who the new prime minister of Japan is? Ever hear of him? No. Nobody knows. Really. I don't know what his name is.
Well, that shows we do have to start bringing his image here into the U.S. media.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, thank you very much, John. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, thank you.
Well, that was certainly much more relaxed and casual kind of interview.
Yes.
That guy, Mr. Alpert, was a television producer here, so he's more like an artist.
Yes, yes.
Did you notice something particular about his language, the way he speaks?
No, I think he actually spoke rather well. In spite of his casual dress, he spoke, I think, very articulately about his ideas, conveyed them very well. Yeah.
Would you say his expression would be more idiomatic or used more slangs compared with Mr. Kubarych, for example?
Oh, yes, yes. Well, his vocabulary level, I would say, is lower. It's more what the common person would use.
I see. So it was easier for us to sort of understand what
so.
he was talking about.
Yeah.
Well, they are talking about the change in the Americans' image of Japan.
Yeah.
And looks like, according to Mr. Alpert, that's a typical image of the Japanese by Americans is a fellow in a dark suit who will work 40 hours a day, 50 hours a day. You know, there are only 24 hours a day, so that's obviously an exaggeration. Eat, sleep, drink his business, ready to sacrifice everything for the cause of his company. Is that typical image, do you think?
I think it probably is, yes, that the Japanese salaryman does nothing but involve himself 100%, or at least 99% in his work. I think that probably is the image.
Having lived in Japan for some years yourself, do you think that really represents the truth in this country?
No, no. I think a lot of Japanese men and women like to also take time off to at least get together with friends or coworkers to eat and drink and talk a lot and laugh a lot and sing songs too.
So there is some truth in it, but it is also some cultural biases and differences that will affect the views.
Yes, yes. Right.
Now we have seen a series of interviews about Japan and about U.S.-Japan relations in this month. We had interviews with the students, university professor who is an expert on Japanese economy, who has practically lived in two worlds, Japan and the United States. Naturally, can be very objective about his view about Japan, and also ordinary business people, and also an economist and the executive in the New York Stock Exchange. And we also have just seen an interview with the artist, television producer. So, Virginia, could you give us your overall impression how the Americans view Japan at this particular time?
Yes. Well, I think we saw that most of them seemed to be open and interested and genuinely, I think, curious, except perhaps for Kubarik. But I think that this Mr. Albert at the end was correct when he said that I think more and more Americans want to know about the everyday things that go on in Japan. And I think that's sincere.
I see. So Americans know quite a lot about Japan, and they are in general favorable, but there is obviously some lack of information. So
Yes.
I think we should work harder, more or less, to let Japanese know more to the American people.
Right, I would agree. Yes.
I'm sure that you enjoyed all those series of interviews for this month. Thank you very much.